Hello and welcome to Today in the News on Vanguard Live. I am Precious Chukwu. We begin with the front pages of the papers this morning, starting off with Vanguard. Vanguard is leading with labor, private sector operators bicker over minimum wage. The writer says organized labor's 497,000 naira demand unrealistic, and that's coming from the presidency. Adds affordability key to arriving at any figure. NLC seeks minimum wage for journalists in Nigeria, cautions against harassment by security agents. You can read more on page 8. At retreat for Interior Ministries Agency, we can see a photo story on that. AGF orders to National Assembly, change of anthem by legislative fiat can't work. We can also see a photo story showing at the Vanguard 2023 Personality of the Year Awards. And on page 19, pay GENCOs 1.3 trillion naira debt to avoid sector's collapse. Elumelu tells the federal government. Edo Guba, more trouble for Labour Party as two ESCOs emerge. NWC appoints ex-speaker Ulti head of 17-man caretaker committee. Our ESCO is still intact, and that's coming from Europa. AGF advocates scrapping of state electoral bodies, conflicting court orders through Kano emirate tussle. And on page 20, Zenith Bank Unyago emerges best banking CEO of the year in Africa. We take a look at the Punch newspaper. The Punch is leading with first anniversary. Tinubu's government awards a 6 trillion naira contracts for roads orders. Right, it says roads, airport projects stop 51 infrastructure contracts in 8 months. Power, 12 billion naira spent annually on airports. Federal government considers a solar. Children's Day, presidents, governors promise a better future. Federal government announces a single-digit interest loan for media industry. 2 motorcyclists are killed in Lagos police station attack. 200 bikes seized. AGF wrong to join Lagos in local government fund suit, and that's coming from Sonwolu. Emirate also court orders Bayero's eviction. Kano says deposed emir a threat. A dissolution of 4 emirates. Sanusi's reinstatement legal, and that's coming from government. And lastly, on the front page of the Punch newspaper, Dangote refinery eyes 500,000 barrel production capacity July. I will take a look at the Guardian. The Guardian is leading with amid penetration surge, Nigeria's spend over 500 billion naira on data in Q1. Federal government spends a fraudulent Nigeria air indefinitely. Insecurity knocks kudos for Tinubu as government marks the first anniversary. Children's Day, 39.2% of Nigeria's kids in child labor. Take a look at the nation. The nation is leading with the council autonomy battles heightens. On page 3, how we fared in 9 months by Kiyamo Kiari. Emir crisis, Kano court orders eviction of Bayero from palace. Bini royal family suspends rebellious duke for betrayal. And lastly, on the front page, Zenith Bank's Onyago is Africa's best CEO of the year. And that's how we can take on the front pages. Join us after the break. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. If you're just joining still today in the news on Vanguard Live, I am Precious Chukwu. Joining me to talk about some of the stories on the front pages of the papers this morning is Mr. Dayo Akintobi, publisher of Liquidity Today, Ikeja Today, and Lekki Today. It's good to have you join me this morning, sir.
Always a pleasure to be here. Good morning to all our viewers.
All right, let's delve in. And last week we had our economic discourse. We're talking about whether Nigeria, the era of uncertainty. And we had on the panelists, we had Joe Ajero and Bismarck Rewani. They were just talking about how to, chart the course of Nigeria forward. And, they traded wars over the organized labor's 615,000 naira minimum wage that they've reduced to 497,000 naira now. And, Bismarck was trying to come from the angle of it's not feasible, the government can't pay, And, Ajero was coming from the angle of, this is in tandem with the harsh realities and socioeconomic realities Nigerians are facing. What's your take on that? And, how do you think we can move on? Because there seems to be a lot of back and forth with Labour, federal government on, we know what is realistic individually, and we see what is happening with Labour and federal government. What's your take on that?
Well, first let's understand that the interests of organized labor is very different from the interests of the private sector. The private sector is designed for profit, so they are always conscious of their bottom line, and as a result, they are not trying to pay more than they can afford to pay, but at the same time, they don't want to underpay because they require productivity. So they're very scrupulous about watching their bottom line, and so they do a lot of calculations and they manipulate data to see where exactly the line is that works for private sector. Meanwhile, organized labor, by and large, they're fighting for government workers. If you remember, majority of the labor force is government workers who are not in a productive sector, who are not in a profit generating sector. As a matter of fact, many government workers are redundant. They're not doing much. It's just kind of like a social service keeping them employed because we don't have any other jobs to give them. But I'm sure we can cut more than 50% of the government workforce, and it won't affect our administrative capabilities at all. So once we are clear that the interests of the two groups diverge, then we can begin to understand the positions they are taking. Labour is saying simply that, look, we've crunched the data and we've calculated what it costs an average Nigerian in today's economy based on inflation, based on devaluation of the naira, based on all these factors. We've done the calculations to see what it would take for the average Nigerian. I think they use a family of 6 as a benchmark, the 2 parents and 4 children, what it would take for such a family to survive. And they use numbers like cost of electricity, cost of fuel, cost of transportation, cost of rent, cost of food. And so they've crunched these numbers and they've said, this is the basic minimum that a family needs to survive in Nigeria. So why are we talking about anything else? Organized labor is taking the role that that figure is not realistic, that what we should do, and government seems to be lining up with organized private sector on this, that what we should demand is what the government can afford to pay. What's the point you insisting on a figure which we know government cannot meet up to? If you remember that as we speak, some states are still not able to afford the 30,000 naira minimum wage. And I would say they are still in arrears of paying that 30,000. So you can now imagine if they now say they should start paying 497,000, how many really would be able to afford it? Plus, look at the domino effect. If you're paying 497 as a minimum wage, that's to the lowest level of workers. That's your drivers, your gatemen, your cooks, the lowest level. So if we're giving the lowest level 497, imagine what managers would get and what supervisors would have to get. So it has a spiraling effect to where the minimum wage we're talking about, that is the absolute lowest that anybody would get paid. So I think Labour knows that the amount it's asking for is unrealistic, but I think Labour is sticking to its guns so it can get a good deal, and a good deal that will be enforceable. Because in the past, a lot of promises have been made that have not been kept, and that's why Labour keeps always threatening to strike and things like that. So I think they know 497 is not sustainable, but they're sticking to their guns so they can get the best deal possible. Right now, I think federal government's last offer was it 54,000? Have they gone up from that? I don't really know. So if you're looking at 54,000 and 497, there's still a gap. But the good thing is both sides have shifted. If you remember, Labour started with 615 and government started with 48. So they both shifted. I foresee more shifting, more from Labour than from government. I think government will go up a bit more and Labour will come down a bit more. It's all about posturing. Each side wants to try and get the best possible deal it can. And this is the way negotiations occur. We never assume that what Labour asks for, government will give, or what government asks for, Labour will accept. We never assume that. There's got to be a dance. There's got to be a process of negotiation. And that's what we're going through now. I just hope that calm heads will prevail. I hope they will allow time, because Labour will probably give a deadline and say, if you don't accede to our demands by so date, all hell is going to break loose. But as long as they allow enough time and they're patient and they negotiate in good faith, I believe that they will come to a meeting point somewhere probably closer to what government is offering now than what Labour is offering, or than what Labour is asking. Because 491,000 is not realistic. They can't afford to pay that.
So a living wage or minimum wage, which is better for Nigerians?
I think that's just semantics, really, to tell you the truth. I think people are just being clever by half and just using English to bamboozle everybody, because whether it's a minimum wage or a living, bottom line for me is a minimum wage has got to be a living wage. What's the point of them paying you an amount that you can't live on? So I think even the minimum wage should be a living wage, and in the living wage should be the minimum wage. So I don't think that we should conflate the two and say they are separate things. So, but the technical definition, of course, is that a living wage is what it takes a family of 6 or a family of 4 to survive on a monthly basis. And labor, of course, is trying to exacerbate the distinction between the two, because labor is saying the president promised to give a living wage, and a living wage, if we want to consider a living wage, is much higher than minimum wage. So if you are saying minimum wage you want to pay is 54, living wage is 491. Here is the calculation of how we came up about it. So of course labor likes that terminology of living wage because it enables them to justify a higher amount, because living wage is calculated on what it costs to survive, whereas minimum wage is usually calculated based on what government can afford to pay. So there's a difference between the two, really. But for me, I think they should be one and the same.
All right. So what strategies or initiatives will you propose, to solve this issue on minimum wage?
Well, Labour has been saying, the reason we are in this dilemma is because of that twin policy that the president did on Inauguration Day last year, which, by the way, is a year tomorrow. I guess that's another conversation about the achievements of the various state and federal government in the 1 year. But Labour is saying that we're where we are today because of those twin policies of fuel subsidy removal and the joining of the parallel market and the official rate in terms of foreign exchange, that there should have been some measures put in place before that. In fact, Jerry used the term I found quite funny. He said the federal government committed the abortion before the pregnancy. That by removing the subsidy and harmonizing the exchange rates before they put the cushioning measures in place, that they condemned everybody to hardship. And so he was talking about CNG buses. He said, so as an afterthought, government said, okay, we'll give you palliatives. And that the palliative process is not even working. And that even those who receive the palliative, it's a short-term solution. It doesn't solve the long-term problem. So when you say what strategies can be employed, well, of course, there's still the issue of they both need to negotiate, they both need to sit at the table, however long it takes, and sort this thing out and come up with a figure that government can afford to pay and that will satisfy labor. In addition, government can offer some things. Remember that they gave this wage award, which was not part of the salary, but they gave a wage award to cushion the effects of this hardship we're going through. So there are additional social welfare measures so government can lowball their offer and say, okay, tell you what, we'll give you to the 100,000. We'll put 2,000 CNG buses on the road to reduce transportation for your workers. We'll do discounted food markets every Saturday, like Lagos State is doing. They have one in Mushin that they do every Saturday, where farmers come with fresh produce and it's subsidized by the government. So government can offer cushioning measures that will make that amount sustain a family, because the other things we are giving help to reduce your monthly outflow. Because at the moment, most of us are living deficit lives. What I mean by that is our outgo is more than our what's coming in for most of us. So if government can assist to where they pay us whatever they can afford to pay, but then they help reduce our expenses on things like food, things like transportation. They've already said they can't subsidize electricity, they can't subsidize fuel, they can't subsidize the major things, but they can subsidize or help us with so many other things that will make 100,000 meaningful in our pocket, if that's what they agree on or whatever amount they come to.
All right, moving on. The chairman of Transnational Corporation, that's Mr. Tony Elumelu, has urged the federal government to, as a matter of urgency, pay off the 1.3 trillion naira owed to the power generation companies in Nigeria to avert collapse of the power sector. And he mentioned that the government is owing just Transcorp Power 250 billion naira, and he kept on, and he further advised the president to just privatize the power sector to just prevent it from collapsing and all of that. What do you make of this story?
All along, we've been thinking that is the distribution end that has problems, because that's the distribution is the one we see. That's the one that brings it into our homes, and we don't have power. It's the distribution companies we blame. And all along, we've been thinking, okay, the distribution companies, as the word is that it was given to the cronies of the administration that privatized power, and these people don't have enough money, they don't have enough expertise, so that the problems come from the distribution sector. Now we heard yesterday, even from generation, which is the beginning point. Of course, generation, transmission, distribution. So generation is the beginning point. We are hearing that those who are generating this power and sending it to the national grid, that they're not getting paid. It's not just Transcorp, it's so many other generating companies that are providing the power, and they're not getting paid. So there is a cash crisis. There is a financial issue to do with power generation in this country, which is part of why the government is saying we can't continue to subsidize power. We don't have the money. And so let people pay market rate for the power that they get, because there is a financial issue. So we're starting to see it now that the astronomical sums, I think they say it's 1.3 trillion, that's owed to all the generating companies that government hasn't been able to pay. So you look at it and you say, well, look, there are two ways the sector can be organized. It can be organized as a government utility in which government is providing a social service to its citizens. Or it can be organized as a private entity which is for profit. And so what Tony Elumelu is saying is, look, the way the whole contraption is structured now, we said we were privatizing when it happened years ago. I think under the Goodluck Jonathan administration, we were privatized, but they didn't fully privatize. They privatized parts, like the generation companies, they are private. Transmission, 100% owned by government. Distribution, government has shares, I think 10% or so many percent. So it's not fully privatized, it's not fully deregulated. So government has small leg inside here, leg inside there, and is trying to say, run it, So you're either fully private or you're fully public. And if you're public, then you're doing it as a social service. So there seems to be a bit of a chaotic arrangement within the structure that's not enabling it to be operating at optimal efficiency, because of course government has no business in business. So if government owns a transmission company, government doesn't know how to run it like a business. So even if the GENCOs are doing what they should do, by the time it gets to transmission level, everything falls apart because government doesn't know how to run a business. So it could be that the GENCOs are very well doing everything that they should do and supplying to the national grid. National grid is now sending it to transmission, and everything falls apart at the transmission level because that's 100% owned by government. So the issue is, it needs to be sorted out. The chaotic structure needs to be. I think what Tony Elumelu was saying is, look, if this thing is going to be private and run by business, let it be fully private. Let's fully privatize it, fully sell it to private people who are investors, who put their hard-earned money into it and know that they have to get a profit. So they will organize themselves in such a way, look at how many people are not metered right now, and they're getting power supply. We don't really know how much they're consuming. They get crazy bills that sometimes are not reflective of consumption, So these are some of the inefficiencies in the system. Of course, there are people who tap lights, who are not paying to the system at all. If we were fully privatized, all those kind of abuses can't occur, because a businessman knows that he can't allow all those leakages. He can't. So this is the issue. I don't know how government is going to find 1.3 trillion. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. So maybe they have to sit down with the GENCOs and try and negotiate installmental payments, or maybe they have to try and give them equity and, maybe exchange the debt for equity in the transmission company or something. They have to find a better way. But what we as Nigerians want is, we want better power supply. Right now, most of the country is in darkness. So we can see that the contraption is not working well, because we're not getting power. A lot of time, even with this band-aid that they did recently, minimum of 20 to 20, most people are not getting it, So, and then heaven help you if you have a fault on your line. Maybe your transformer blows up, or there's a spark on your line, or the feeder pillar. Heaven help you. You'll be in darkness for months because they don't even have the means to come and repair any fault on your line immediately. So even though it's a loss for them because they're not generating revenue within the period that you don't have power, but their inefficiencies don't even let them address faults and repairs quickly enough to where they won't take a loss. So they're losing, we're losing, everybody's losing. It's not good. It's not a good situation at all.
Yeah. Moving on, the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, Prince Lateef Fagbemi, has warned the National Assembly that such an important task of reversing the present national anthem to the old one must not be done by what he described as legislative fears. What did you think of, them saying they wanted to revert,
Well, I found it interesting in that, to tell you the truth, I actually prefer the old anthem. We were born in the 60s. We grew up when there was nationalistic fervor, and at the time when we stopped using the British pound and changed to naira, when we stopped driving on the left like Britain did, and we turned to the right. We're coming into our own as an independent country, and we were embracing our cultural values. So that old anthem is what we grew up with, and we were proud of. And if you listen to the words, it inspires you. Nigeria, we hail thee, our own dear native land. Though tribe and tongue may differ, in brotherhood we stand. You listen to those things, and it electrifies your mind and makes you proud to be a Nigerian. So I love that old anthem. Now, when they brought in the new one, I think it was under the military dispensation. I think they just imposed it by fiat. They just came one day, military. Their own is they rule by decree. They just woke up one day and said, out with the old anthem. This will be your anthem from tomorrow. Who can complain? Nobody will have to accept anything that they said. I think I'm correct that it was the military that changed it, but my memory is that was a long time ago. So the issue becomes, democratically, under a constitutional government, how do you go about making such a change if you decide you want to change it? The AGF says NASS doesn't have the authority to do it. So the question is, who does have the authority? Is it the executive? Does a law have to be passed? How do we go about doing it? I think we're in uncharted waters here. And for the Attorney General to have said you can't do it by legislative fiat, he must be standing on some sort of legal ground, which, of course, us not being lawyers, we really can't say. But things like anthems can change, things like flags can change, things like currency, name can change. In the evolution of man, change is a constant. It's a constant. So there's got to be, I don't think the Attorney General was saying we can't do it. I think what he was saying simply was there's a right way and a proper way to go about doing it. Probably have a public hearing first to know the mood of the people. Most of the people in Nigeria today, 60%, are between the ages of 18 and 35, never knew anything about the old anthem. So why would they even be interested in going back to the old anthem? So this may be a throwback to those of us in the gray hair generation. So maybe majority of those in Nigeria of today who are not aware of that anthem may not want it. So perhaps the first step is to have a public hearing, a series of public hearings, and feel the mood of the public on this thing. At that point, know whether it is something that is wanted or not. I think what the Attorney General was saying is that National Assembly, you are the ones that are saying you want it. Have you asked Nigerians if they want it? So the fact that you want it doesn't mean all Nigerians want it. So you can't impose it on people. You're not military. It was the military that imposed it. You can't do that. So I think there's a procedure beginning with a public hearing. I think that's what the Attorney General is complaining about.
All right, moving on. Let's touch on the Game of Thrones happening in Kano, and the conflicting court orders. What's your take on that situation?
Well, it's a mess because each party has its own group of supporters, so it's difficult to know what the mood of the people is in terms of who they would prefer. But yes, we have two contending forces for the Emir of Kano. The deposed Emir Bayero managed to get a court order first from a federal high court that said that maintain status quo until the substantive case can be heard. So you stay here, the Emir. The law that NASS, that Kano State House of Assembly passed, by which they now brought back in the former Emir, that let's put everything on hold. Well, apparently the constitution vests all chieftaincy matters in the state government and the state house of assembly. That the federal, there's nowhere in the constitution that the federal government has any authority whatsoever on chieftaincy matters, and it's that chieftaincy matters clause that controls emirs, obas, ezes, all traditional rulers are captured under that chieftaincy matters act, which the constitution vests in the state governments. So a lot of people have questioned the locus, the jurisdictional authority of the federal high court that passed that first injunction, that gave that first ruling. So anyway, the Kano state government and the new emir have now gone to the state court, which constitutionally now has jurisdiction. They've gone to the state court and they've got an injunction that now says it prohibits the former emir from parading himself as the emir. It also asked him to vacate the palace immediately, and all 5 of them that were deposed, that they should all vacate immediately and they should stop parading themselves as traditional rulers. So which of the 2 court orders will prevail? Well, we're not constitutional experts, but my sense from my little reading of it is that what the state court said carries more weight because it has the jurisdiction to make that ruling. But at the end of the day, as things like this happen, whenever there's contention, as mature adults, as public figures who are seeking the welfare and the well-being of our people, it should not end in contention and fisticuffs. We should sit down at a table and work it out, right? Let's remember that politics is what has caused this problem. Because if you remember, it was politics from Ganduje that deposed Sanusi as emir. Now, the same politics that brought Bayero as emir, that same politics has removed him as emir and reinstated Sanusi as emir. So politics has gotten involved in the traditional thing, and it will be murky. Because now, how do you know that the next governor who comes in after 4 years or 8 years will pass another law and say, kick this guy out and put it somewhere? Once government has gotten involved, or politics has gotten involved in the traditional institution, all bets are off. It means that it's always open to challenge, it's always open to the whims and caprices of political players. And the traditional institutions have allowed that incursion into the area of authority. They have only themselves to blame because now they are subject to the authority of political players. So I don't think this is the end of it, or that this is the last we will see of this kind of thing. It will continue to happen. So I would say that if you are putting the interest of your people first before anything else, you will sit down with these people. If what makes sense is for the deposed emir to accept what has happened, because remember, when Sanusi was deposed, he accepted what happened and he left. He didn't stay in the town to cost for his supporters to stuff. He left. They banished him to exile. He left and let peace reign. So now that the tables have turned, let the other guy to leave quietly. Let peace reign. The most important thing is peace. So whatever we need to do to engender that peace is what should happen. And I believe the thing is, for now, the law seems to favor Sanusi at this point. So for peace to reign, let Bayero go quietly. After he's gone, he can start looking at legal means to challenge what has happened, but to at least keep the peace for now. Let him go quietly and let him admonish his supporters that they should remain peaceful, they should remain calm. He should talk about the will of God. He should talk about, and tell them to just remain calm and that let the judicial process play out. Because remember, there are still court challenges, so that the case will still be held in court. So we still don't know how it will end at the end of the day.
All right. So do you think the situation where the emirate tussle is at, needs the federal government to get involved?
Well, not the federal government, but the president is the father of all. So when he sees 2 warring factions in a way that's affecting the stability of that state, is affecting the welfare of the people, he has the moral right to call his children and say, let's resolve this amicably. He can wade in privately as father of all. But constitutionally, the federal government doesn't have a say in anything to do with chieftaincy matters. That's why you see that it's the state governors that give staff of office. It's the state governors that receive the recommendation from the kingmakers and approve the appointment of any traditional leader. And they're the ones who give them the staff of office and swear them in as whatever. Then the traditional rites will still take place. But the governor is the one. So it is the state who is in charge. So when you say, should the federal government intervene, I don't think the federal government has the jurisdiction or the right to intervene in this matter at all. But the president, as well, I can't call him a private individual, but the president, as the father of all, can call his children and try to mediate among them unofficially, because he doesn't have any official authority to dictate how it's going to go. You know, look at how he waded into the Fubara-Wike feud in the beginning when the thing first started. First of all, he was not in their party. They are both PDP. He was not in their party, right? Secondly, it's a state affair. Rivers State is not federal government. But he still sat them down, called them to an informal sitting, and I remember he wrote a memo of some sort where he seemed to try to resolve the issues and said, okay, let's do it this way, let's do it this way. He can also do that at the level of the tradition. They're not bound by his recommendations, but what he can do is call them and try to make peace.
All right, let's just touch on this one, because I mean, the president's going to be a year in office tomorrow, and from what you've seen so far, the policies, Nigerians, the harsh economic realities and all of that, how would you rate the president in the last 1 year, in terms of, being in tandem with what Nigerians are going through?
Well, if we are to rate him on the first 1 year, based on all the things that have come to pass, we'll give him a failing grade. But I say that with a caveat that many of the things he is trying to do require a longer gestation period than 1 year. And his argument is that the situation he met when he came into office, which he has said, don't feel sorry for me, I asked for this job. So whatever comes out of it, I take responsibility. But his point is that the reforms he is trying to implement have a longer gestation period than 1 year, and they're the kind of things that will bring pain first before they bring succor. So his argument is, we're going through the painful period now because of a better tomorrow. As a matter of fact, just this past week, he said, your suffering is over, your bleeding is over, prosperity begins now. Most Nigerians will not agree with that, because at the moment, most of us are still suffering. So the jury is still out on whether he is correct, whether he knows what he's doing, to the point that these reforms he has put in place will bring ease and prosperity maybe tomorrow or day after tomorrow or next week or next month or next year. We don't know. So I think that we can't really rate until after we see the outcome of those reforms. If those reforms don't succeed in making our life better within the specified period, then he has failed. But we don't know yet, because according to him, he's still in the retooling period where he's still refixing stuff. So perhaps 1 year is too short to know. But if it's to just look individually, not holistically, look individually at all the things he has done, definitely we are worse off today than we were 1 year ago. Right? If you look at all the indices, cost of this, cost of that, debt, the country's debt, external reserve down, interest rate up, in fact, all the horrible things have increased and all the good things have decreased. That's if you look at it individually. But if you take a holistic look at the whole 1 year period, you could give him benefit of the doubt and say, okay, well, he says he knows what he's doing. We don't know if he knows what he's doing, but he says he knows what he's doing. So we'll find out sooner than later, trust me, whether he knows what he's doing or not. Go find out, because if things continue to be the way they are for a longer period, we will know that his reforms are not working. And then we can rate him and say you failed.
All right, let's touch on Mr. and Mrs. And Mrs. is speaking this one. She says, your friend is fond of threatening to send his wife packing. Marriage is like football. If one manager is sacked from a club, another club will employ the same manager. Don't look at me like that.
Ooh, that's a threat. If you try to sack me, there's somebody else waiting to employ me quickly. Okay, so So Mrs. is still in demand, is what she's saying. So take your time, because if you misbehave and you say you want to sack me, there's another club somewhere that will employ me quickly. Nice one. So I advise Mr. not to try and sack her.
No, he shouldn't try that. All right, thank you so much, Mr. Daya Akintobi, publisher of Liquidity Today, Lekki Today, and Ikeja. Thank you for sharing your thought with us this morning.
My pleasure always.
Also, remember that you can equally like, share, and subscribe on all our social media platforms showing on your screen. To find out today's stories, go to our website www.vanguardindia.com to find out more. I am Precious Chukwu.